Welcome back to another episode of My BrainWise Coach. I'm Cole Bastian.
And I'm Phil Dixon.
And thank you for coming back and listening to another conversation where we go through and decode things that are happening in all of our lives, our topics, or just general things from a lens of neuroscience, behavioral science, and then ultimately, how do we take all of those insights and do something different if we so choose in our lives? And if you are enjoying this conversation and enjoying our podcast, please rate and review us. Of course, a 5-star rating on Spotify and Apple is great, or any of the places that you rate and review us. But when you do that, it helps others be able to find our show and go on this experience and journey of becoming BrainWise also. And then, of course, comment, share, and subscribe on any of our social media channels, YouTube, or wherever it is that you're finding our content, because it helps others truly be able to grow this BrainWise community. We're almost at 1,600 total YouTube subscribers, which is just mind-boggling. So let's get there as fast as possible by engaging with all of the content. Phil, I know we've got a really good conversation today that we're going to have, but before we do, we've got a little bit of a story or kind of a preamble on the front end. So why don't you get us started?
I will. So I want you to imagine this. There's a man named David. He walks into the grocery store on a Tuesday afternoon, about 5:30-ish. He's tired, he's hungry, and he's in a hurry. He's got exactly one thing on his mind to buy, and that's pasta sauce. But the minute he steps inside the grocery store, his brain starts to make decisions that he will never be consciously aware of. The warm lighting lowers his stress response. The smell of the fresh bread from the far end bakery activates his reward circuitry. The soft music slows his walking pace by about 8%. You'll have noticed that in grocery stores, people slow down. The end cap display, the one he never planned to look at, is engineered to hijack his attention. David came in for pasta sauce, and he left with 12 items. Let's shift the scenario a little bit. Now we've got a woman named Carla. Okay. She's sitting on the couch, and she opens Netflix on the TV. She has 90 seconds. That's the average time before a viewer gives up and switches to another streaming channel. In that tiny window, 90 seconds, Netflix algorithm is reading her. What she hovered over, what she abandoned after 14 seconds, and what she watched last Tuesday at 9:17 p.m. The thumbnails she sees aren't at random. They're personalized predictions of what her dopamine system will respond to. So whether you're walking into a store, or you're sitting watching TV and the ads, or watching streaming, you think you're choosing freely, but you're not. Your brain is being guided by a century's worth of retail psychology and a decade of machine learning optimization.
Wow. And it's just absolutely amazing when you think about it, because that's, exactly what today's conversation is going to be about. The neuroscience of buying and selling in stores, online, inside the algorithms that shape what we see. Because whether you're David in the grocery store or Carla on the couch, your brain is being influenced in ways that you rarely notice. And Phil, I think it's just fascinating because it's also evolved from the in-store retail experience as David was there, and how they set things up, how the lighting is, the music, the smells, obviously all the overall experiences, what they put on the end caps, to now also what's online and what you're seeing online. From, you might search one thing on Google about, buying a tent, and then now what's on your social media as you are scrolling is, guess what? You're going to see all this stuff about tents. And sometimes I swear that, I can't say her name because she'll start talking to us, her name, Alexa, from Amazon, is listening to me, because I don't even search something and it'll pop up in an ad. So it's amazing. And of course, there's so much neuroscience and really just behavioral science put behind all of that.
Absolutely. Don't let anybody convince you otherwise. There's a lot of science going into every millisecond, probably, but at least every second of what's going with the device that you referred to or similar devices. We've actually thrown ours out now. My wife, Kathy, her mother died, and we wanted to do something with the ashes, and we started making conversations about it. The next thing we know, we're getting all sorts of things about on the emails about the urns that we could buy. And we never did anything other than talk about it. Yeah, she's gone.
Yeah. I might need to, although I rely on, and this is terrible, but I do enjoy having her because she turns the lights on and off and I don't have to get out of bed or walk to all the lamps and individually turn them off. I know, what terrible thing. And then the shopping list feature also really helps. So that way my husband, when he needs something or realizes whatever, he can tell her to add it to the shopping list and then I'll see it pop up. But yeah, it's definitely, I wonder if there's a setting to change so that she's not listening ambiently or just in the background there. But let's start with the basics of buying and selling, Phil. What's happening specifically when we're buying? What's happening from a neuroscience perspective? What are some of the things that are set up to, obviously, ultimately, we're going to fail at that experiment because we're going to buy more just based off of what they've applied neuroscientifically.
We've talked a lot in this series about the difference between rational thinking and emotional thinking. When we buy something, we like to think we're being rational. And I need this, but that's not the way it works. The brain does not shop rationally. It shops emotionally, and then internally we justify it rationally and logically. So it's that simple.
Interesting. And so what system of the brain is that pulling from? I think it's the limbic system, if I'm not mistaken, but can you tell us a little bit more about what's actually happening in that particular space?
Yeah, so the limbic system is very fast. Daniel Kahneman summarized it by writing the book Thinking Fast and Slow. The fast is the limbic system, and it always makes the first move. And it's what releases dopamine, and it spikes. We see something we like or that we know is going to taste good. And by the way, anticipation is also something that just triggers off the emotional system. And dopamine, hey, we're going to get a reward. We're going to light it. And novelty lights, easy for me to say, novelty lights up the hippocampus. And then once those two things have roared away, the prefrontal cortex comes in, puts a story around it so that it all makes sense. And that's all going on non-consciously.
And that's probably why the limited time only part works. And can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because that's not just trying to come up with a nice phrase for encouragement of buying, but there's actually something else behind it when stores or companies use limited time only wording when talking about sales.
Yeah, and there's a couple of things. Cialdini talked about the things about scarcity. And scarcity says we've got to do something. Triggers off the limbic system. We have a thing called loss aversion. We don't like to lose. In fact, the theorists say that if you've got one element of positivity and gain and one element of loss, the impact of the brain is 5 times greater for the loss than the reward. And so we tend to want to avoid losing something more than we want to try and gain something. And if it's something says limited lifetime, only 3 left, do it now, this offer closes 31st of January, whatever it might be, all of those things trigger off something in our brain that goes, oh, yes, I need to do it now. And I now notice that other people are doing it. So I get socially driven as well.
And Phil, what's interesting about all this whole experience, there's also some elements of predictability. You were talking about loss aversion and ultimately how some of those kind of catchphrases ultimately pull us in. But then there's also these kind of brands that feel familiar, feel safe, because we obviously love the ability, as our brains do anyways, for predictability. Even if, for example, not all off brands certainly are as equal to their counterparts, but many of them are. And however, people will pay way more for a name brand item that in quality and overall is the same as the generic item. and which is also really fascinating. I don't know if there's any kind of additional details you want to share about that, but that's something as you were talking that really resonated with me, or I'm thinking about just shopping with different individuals, how, now myself, I'm not typically going to go for a lot of name brand items outside of my jeans. I certainly do. And there is this kind of, I love the Buckle or BKE jeans typically, or Rock Revival, because they have a certain style and quality that I really like. You can't find that anywhere. But when you go into whatever retail store it is that you're purchasing your foil or your Ziploc bags from, or you're buying green beans or something, the generic brand is almost, not always, but almost always just as equal in quality, yet significantly reduced in price. But people have a hard time purchasing, especially if there is some kind of connection. Do you want to share anything about that and why that's be happening?
You look at some of the famous brands. I'll mention just a few of them, but Apple, Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola, they're brands that trigger off, hey, I know I'm going to be safe. And in my old profession, in the IT profession, IBM was, in those days, was the big kahuna. And everybody knew that, quote, if you bought IBM, you'd never get into trouble. People did, but they didn't think they would. And it makes our brains feel safe. And the off-brand or the brand that's up and coming but hasn't made it for themselves yet, it doesn't feel safe. So therefore, our brains go, if you buy this, you're all going to die. And that's the internal message we get. Whereas, in fact, if a logical person goes, no, if I buy X instead of Y, and the worst that happens is I wasted a little bit of money. I wasted $15 on a six-pack or whatever it might be.
I think about it even from a perspective of like over-the-counter medicine, because the active ingredient is, for example, an Advil is ibuprofen, but there are some people, and obviously there's no bad or implication or bad intention behind this in terms of what I'm sharing, but there are some individuals who truly believe that they need to buy Advil because Advil is the only brand that gives them the relief that they need. Whereas it's typically, we know it to be the active ingredient that's providing it. But there is this also, I think there's an emotional connection to some brands. Maybe when we weren't feeling well, we use this particular brand of cold and flu medicine. And in our minds, it helped us get better faster. Therefore, now I'm going to always buy Tylenol cold and flu, or rather than the generic version of it. So I think there's also this emotional connection, because I can also think of Campbell's or Oreo cookies or whatever. There's probably some emotional experiences that we have with other people when cooking or eating food that goes, okay, I'm going to buy that. Now I will say Campbell's to me does taste differently, but that's because I was raised on Campbell's versus a cream of whatever soup that's the Great Value brand or the Kroger brand or Publix brand.
Yeah. And you said part of it right there and then, I was raised on it. Again, you were raised on it, you survived, your brain says it's safe, and it's known, I don't have to take a risk, blah, 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 all those things. And so therefore, and it's also the simplest. You'll also find that there's things that you reach out for in the way of colors, a recognizable logo, something that stands out from other things when they're on the shelf. Obviously the eye level shelves are engineered even more than the rest of them. That's exactly what I've been involved in some recent discussions where we're talking about the fact that you want to be able to recognize a brand in a bar and a restaurant from at least 30 feet away. And if you can't recognize it, it's not going to attract someone's attention. So the thinking and psychology, neuroscience, etc., that goes into these, everything is now engineered to take advantage of how your individual brain works. And we can't, in this 45-minute session, we can't warn everybody about everything. But what we can do is say, just be aware. You're not making necessarily conscious decisions. This is all being triggered in some way, shape, or form. So if you can just slow it down, you might be able to choose actually a better alternative or save yourself some money.
Which I think is a great segue, Phil, because the next part of what we wanted to talk about is actually the physical stores. And you said this in terms of something being designed, not engineered. But when you think of these physical stores that we go to and shop at, they're not designed. They truly are engineered with neuroscience and behavioral psychology implemented or integrated into the overall design and flow and placement of all the different items that are available. So you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, lots of things to talk about there. We could go on for a couple of hours, but I actually give you something I was involved in probably about 15 years ago when we were helping a design of a retail layout. And the first thing we decided to do was to put or in fact, the company decided to do was put like a coffee bar just 15 feet inside the door. And the 15 feet was to allow that change of thinking as you came in from a busy street or a busy shopping mall, into more of an inner sanctum, if you like, gave an opportunity for your brain to slow down. As I said earlier on, you start walking 8% slower. And we would actually have people walk up, and the first thing they saw was the coffee bar.
Wow.
And the instruction was to I call it the barista, but the person behind the coffee bar was to ask, would you like a beverage? And there was something like 90% of the people said no. We changed one word. Would you like a complimentary beverage?
Oh, of course.
And it went up from 10% saying yes to 90% saying yes.
Of course. It's free.
One word. Now, that's a simple set of engineering, but nevertheless, it was deliberate and changed the whole experience of people walking around. I'll tell you, the second part of it was that they would get a cup of beverage now they're walking around with, and that was the indicator to the salespeople. They wouldn't come up and say, can I help you, sir? Can I help you, madam? They'd say, I notice your coffee cup is empty. Can I get you a refill? That now engaged the person in a friend-to-friend manner, and therefore the conversation was a lot easier. It wasn't like, oh, I'm the customer and you're the salesperson. Can I get you a cup of coffee? So all of those things are engineered.
It's amazing because even lighting, music effects, like you were talking about, smells, specifically, I think of smells in like restaurants, but even outside of that, especially in restaurants, we always talk about bread in certain, especially like an Italian environment or others, because it gets you hungry. It gets you wanting to think about buying food. But even what you put in, the way that they set up the displays in a lot of these retail establishments, like, for example, they'll put chocolate syrup, which you can use for milk, you can use for all kinds of things. It's not just for ice cream, but they put the most expensive chocolate syrup in the ice cream aisle or all the different toppings, of course, because now you don't have to walk as far. They want you to buy those complimentary items, or even down to what is by the cash register. And all those little, what I call, some of them are trash and trinkets, quite honestly. They put them all right there at a certain price point because it encourages the eyes to wander while you're waiting. Every part of it is ultimately being engineered to encourage or elicit the largest purchase or spend that they can get out of all of us as consumers, even down to the overall packaging. It influences the quality, or the perceived quality anyways.
And I learned something in this past week, and that is when you look at a bottle, and then we make an assessment in our brains of not only the bottle itself, but the texture of the bottle. And so with the coloring and just whatever's going on, if you can actually impact or even put texture on the bottle, people associate it with a higher quality. And so they'll pay more.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's probably what these bottles are using like a felt style label versus just the generic plastic label that people use, but to try to demonstrate that there's a higher level of quality.
Yeah, and the brain makes a difference between if you buy a can of something, whether the label has been stuck on, and we differentiate things.
Interesting. That is really fascinating.
Yeah,
and of course, in the retail stores, there's an additional where the overall layout of the store, because they always put milk, bread, and eggs all the way at the back of the store. Yep. They don't put those up front for convenience. And that's because they ultimately want you to walk around, and what one might call your brain is going to encounter some micro rewards, but ultimately you're going to be enticed to purchase additional items as you walk farther along in the store.
There's a very high-end grocery store near to us, and I can never go in and just buy the 3 things I want. I always will, oh yeah, those honey-covered walnuts will be delicious. And Did I need to spend $9 on honey-colored walnuts? Heck no. But my brain triggered. The dopamine reward was already in place, anticipating how good they'll be. And in the basket it goes.
Amen. That's why I have to avoid the bakery aisle or the bakery section. I have to avoid the ice cream section if I don't really want to buy any, especially sweets. Now, I'm pretty good at, I can go in if I have a list. I very rarely will add a ton of items to the list. Sometimes I'll get a few extra things, but when it comes to sweets, oh, there's no doubt I will definitely stockpile, which is terrible. So I just choose not to go down those aisles anymore. But can you talk to us about IKEA? Because IKEA, Phil, is a little different in its setup in terms of they've been very intentional on how they set up their store, and there's a reason behind it.
Yeah, they're actually anticipating what they want the pathway to be for you to actually walk around. And in their heads, it's a loop as you from one thing to another. They call it cognitive momentum. And the idea is that your brain has a pattern that you will first of all want the big items, and then you want the slightly smaller items, then you're going to want the soft items. And so your pathway is designed to go around. Lots of furniture stores designed the same way. And again, a company I was working with some time back was selling high-end kitchen equipment. And so they would actually have at 10 o'clock on a Saturday and Sunday, they'd actually have a chef come in and start cooking at 10 o'clock in the morning. And, people would hang around because of the smell. Very difficult to not decide to buy something when your brain is saying, hey, this is a wonderful smell and it's going to taste delicious.
Exactly. 100%. It's just, it is amazing. And especially in IKEA, I just have been in a couple of times, and it's almost like you can only really go one direction in their stores. You can't go in multiple ways. And it is a very predetermined path, which is just fascinating. And even in luxury retail, on kind of the opposite side of IKEA, of course, it is even more intentional because everything is slowing down. Soft lighting, wider aisles, plush seating. They're all designed to shift our nervous system into a parasympathetic state to calm ourselves, because ultimately the calmer we are, the more relaxed we are, the more we are, or the likelier we are to spend additional money, which of course, when you enter a luxury place, the cost is already significant. So I think to me, there's an expectation that some of these things are there in terms of wider aisles, plush seating, much nicer places, much nicer overall fixtures, because I'm already spending 10 times as much on this particular item than I would be if I went somewhere else.
And it's even down to, I think it's something like 88% of people, at least in America, are right-handed as opposed to left-handed. Mm-hmm. Do you put the sales rack on the right-hand side or the left-hand side? Mm-hmm. It's down to that level of analysis. And so, again, we're not saying to people, don't go into these stores because you've got to, but just be aware that you're actually not making conscious choices in many of these. And so bring it out of the non-conscious into the conscious. Is this what I really want to be buying today? Or am I being driven by, I'm in an engineered environment just as much as I am when I'm at Disneyland?
And a good example of that, and I think it's a great transition, is it's a little bit different because I wasn't in the store when I bought this item. I was actually on social media, and an influencer that we're close to was I can't remember what it was, using some kind of electric mop, I think, or electric scrubber. And I was like, oh, that'll be good. That'll be easy to use. And it's the first time in my entire life that I've ever been influenced to buy an item by somebody else, like a social media influencer. And then after I did that, I had such terrible buyer's remorse because, Phil, you know how many times I've used it? 0 times. Not once have I used that thing for its intended purpose. I think I've used it our vents are up in the ceiling and it was really high, so I use it to close and open the vents, but I do not use it to actually clean anything. So total waste of money. But it was a good lesson for me. Okay, take a moment to really think about, do you need that item, or are they simply creating a space for you in your social platform that, oh yeah, that would make sense to go and purchase that, which I think is a great segue, Phil, into online shopping and how it's a little bit different. It can be, I was going to use it actually as a tip for our BrainWise friends because it does help me not spend as much money. But it also, there are some things that they've intentionally done, even with the online shopping experience, to encourage more buying. So can you share with us some of the differences there?
Oh, yeah. I mean, first of all, so many differences in basically what they're doing online. And so when you go into a store, physical store, they want you to be there as long as possible.
Right.
Right. So therefore they want to, slow things down, make you calmer, spend more. Online, I guess it's different slightly, is what they're trying to do online is take the friction out of the process. So it's simple for you to go, oh, yes, one click buy. How many of us haven't gone buy now as opposed to put it in the cart? Again, all these things are engineered so that you'll spend more money. So they're just trying to take the friction out of it. And also, when you're in a store, you know that there's going to be a point of time at the end of your walk around when you're either going to get cash out of your pocket or a credit card or something, and you're going to have to actually pay. It's a physical exchange that you do. Maybe not with the smartphones now, you just hold those up. But there's an actual act. That's not so true when you're buying online. It's another click of a button. And so you're not alerting the risk orientation of your brain. And by the way, that thing you bought, you can always use it as a doorstop. So it's got, you've got multiple purposes and multiple uses for this thing.
Are you trying to say that it was okay that I purchased that stupid electric scrubber that's never been?
I'm trying to make you feel a bit better.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I think it's still sitting up in the laundry room, quite honestly.
There's a game to be played. How many creative uses can we come for this electric scrubber?
Yeah, exactly. And then are outside of its intended use, because its intended use was to like scrub the big old shower and the tub and around the toilet and stuff like that. And I don't use that. I go to my natural tendency of the things that I've always used in the past because it's just easier. I know it works. And we're blessed. We're able to have cleaners come and do cleaning. We're not having to do as much of it anyway. So I don't know what I was thinking when I bought that particular thing, outside of the fact that we do know this in particular creator, the influencer. Therefore, when I purchased it, she made a little money off of us. So I suppose that's the only benefit, quite honestly. But then after that, I was like, this is dumb. I'm never buying another thing like that again, unless I know I need it for whatever purpose. No, just nuts. But then on this online shopping experience, Phil, there's also, it's maybe called choice architecture to some degree, but it gives us, like in Amazon or on the Walmart app or whatever app it is, the things that you buy most frequently, it'll say, okay, click here and you can quickly rebuy, and it lists all the items that you've bought multiple times and you can just click. Or it'll give you recommended items when you're on another item, and it'll say, oh, these are similar, or here's a bundle here. People who buy this typically will also buy this. And on Amazon now, you can actually, it'll say, people who bought this item, they've also bought these two. Go ahead and add all to your cart. And it just gives you like a total versus an individual price per item, which is amazing because it's not, deceptive is the wrong word, but it is enticing, or it's certainly playing on the different parts of our brain because it's removing some of the angst of having to make a choice. It's just real quick, click. Easy to say that too.
But it's also relying on the social proof and that other people have done this. Then is either you're going to miss out, or you're not going to be like everybody else, or you're stupid if you don't. There's all sorts of things that's being played on. And so, again, we're not trying to say don't buy anything. What we are trying to say is just be very cautious when you step back and know that however it's being presented to you in a certain way. If you and I were sitting and buying the same thing, we may not actually see the same screen because it's learned your behavioral pattern versus mine.
Which I think is a great transition to the algorithmic persuasion, or let's switch the vantage point. We're talking about how the stores and the online experience and all those things are set up. Now let's move into a little bit of the seller's point of perspective, starting with the algorithm. So for example, Netflix, and we talked a little bit about that, but help us understand a little bit of how these algorithms are playing into or pulling on some of the neuroscience aspects that we know to be true.
Netflix is a good example, and most of them are doing this similar thing. What they've learned is when it used to be, here's a movie, you watch the movie, and it comes up, did you like it, did you not like it? Or do you think you're going to like this? Or would you recommend it to somebody else? All those type of things, what they've learned is we aren't very good at doing that assessment. We aren't very good at predicting and recalling what we liked and what we didn't like. What they're now finding is what you actually did is far more impactful of what you're going to do next. So how long we talked about it in the story up front, how long you hover over something, what you select, 90 seconds. If you don't find what you want in 90 seconds, you're going to go to another streaming. So they're going to encourage, I think it was Target. I may have that wrong, but I think it was Target that actually started to predict people's state of mind, state of physical. They actually predicted one young lady that was pregnant, and turns out they were correct. So those algorithms are getting to be, I'll just call it pure neuroscience. And so we are an algorithm based on not only neuroscience in general, but neuroscience of your particular brain.
Right. Which I think is really fascinating. And when we think about TikTok, obviously tracks scroll velocity. A lot of these things are doing, excuse me, the algorithm is accurate in terms of what's going to capture the majority of our attention. And I was going to say, or not Amazon, but Walmart has actually started this where it now knows your credit card to a certain degree. And because like I will go to Walmart and buy whatever items I'm going to buy, and I'll pay with my credit card. When I do that, now it'll knows that credit card is related to this phone number. So I'm going to text them, or I can consent to have a text receipt come in. And then it also puts it in my Walmart app. So it's tracking, even though I didn't purchase it online or enter in like a Walmart number or whatever, like they have for Kroger and Publix and all these other places. It's now tracking it just simply based off the credit card that I use and how that's linked to all of this other data. And I'm sure, one, it makes it a little easier for me because the receipt comes digitally. It's putting all of my items and receipts online, so I don't have to track those receipts. But then it's also using that data to suggest items and suggest sales and to send stuff my way to get me to purchase more.
Yeah. And basically what they're doing is learning ways to activate your dopamine pathways, your reward system.
Right.
And whether that's to make life simpler for you or to make it more accurate or to suggest things for you, it's all, how do I activate Cole's reward system? Is dopamine.
Right.
Because if I can do that, I can sell you more.
Right. Which is just so interesting. And let's take a second and flip the lens a little bit here, Phil, because we talked a lot about buying, retailers, online, establishments, how those things really pull on our threat and reward system of the brain and are ultimately set up to encourage us to buy as much as possible. But let's talk about from the selling perspective. What's happening in the brain of the person that's selling these items to us?
Again, let's make certain that we put some things in perspective here. We're talking about in the retail environment. We're not talking about the software salesperson that is trying to sell you $1 million of software. Right. That's a different set of activity. Although there's still some similarities. In general, people will buy from people that are like them and that they like. Right. When you're selling, be likable. That's first step is make certain that you have an ability to have some level of empathy, engagement with the person that's coming across to you. And it really relies upon an emotional relationship with the other person. Emotions are contagious, and we know that. And we pick up on we very rapidly pick up on whether somebody likes us, or whether they're friendly with us, and all those things. How long does it take to know whether someone's got your best intentions at heart or not? Milliseconds, literally milliseconds. And as soon as you start to hear their voice, and if the voice matches the expression on your face and matches the body language you project and it all is friendly, then all of a sudden it's a lot easier for the person to do the buying, and therefore it's a lot easier for me as the salesperson to do the selling.
Exactly. We've also talked about how start with a higher priced item, because as you do that, you're going to, as the salesperson, especially if you're commission based, you'll ultimately, you may not sell that the highest one, but you won't sell the cheapest one either. Therefore, you make a little bit more money. It's just really interesting because even all the way down to eye contact, the warm tone, steadying pace, all of those increase oxytocin, which increases a willingness to buy. So I just think it's really interesting from the perspective of how retailers and the shopping experience is set up to pull on these, but then also the seller, the individual, especially a commission-based salesperson, there are things that they can do, obviously, because they're there to make money and they want to optimize their ability to do. There's things that they can do to try to increase one's purchasing and the overall purchase price of what they might be buying.
Yeah. And I think we've talked about the sort of the impact of starting high versus low. Also, the what we call suggestive buying is rather than say, would you like, which gives you a yes or no answer. It is, which would you prefer?
I recommend this one.
Yeah. Which would you prefer, this one or this one, sir, madam? Mm-hmm. Right now, you've triggered that person's brain into the fact that you're going to buy rather than would you like one of these?
Right.
And so the very phraseology and authenticity, really a big deal. And are you familiar with what they call Duchenne lines?
I don't think so.
So give us a big smile, if you would. When you smile, here your eyes crinkle up, right? Well, those are called Duchenne lines. Monsieur Duchenne spent his life looking at sort of psychological behavior like this. If you smile and don't crinkle your eyes, the other person picks it up and goes, smile. And when you smile with the whole face rather than with your mouth.
Right. Which I can't smile with my teeth, by the way. For anyone who's wondering, it just doesn't work. It actually looks scary. So we won't try it out.
Especially if you smile having just bought an electric scrubber that you didn't want.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, we won't even talk about how much it was because it wasn't all that expensive either.
I won't ask, but I will when we're off camera. How's that?
Oh, perfect.
Okay.
Bill, where does all of this go? Because personalization can easily become probably tiptoeing the line of manipulation. So where does all of this go, and how can we as a BrainWise community do our best to avoid some of the typical pitfalls that might be being used to play on how our brain is operating?
First of all, it's like everything we say, become aware. You become aware that it's not that they might be manipulating you. They are manipulating you.
Right.
Let's just be very clear about that. But manipulation is commonplace in everything. So, for example, and I know you've been going through an interview process. When you interview, my guess is you probably put on a nice shirt.
And a jacket.
And a jacket. You're manipulating the other person's impression of you.
Right.
Right? Is that wrong?
No, because it's somewhat expected, I think, in that setting. If I showed up in a sweatshirt and sweatpants, that I'm almost guaranteed not to get the job. There won't even be a conversation. They'll probably just say, wait a minute, you might need to go home and rethink your life a little bit.
Yeah. And so in some cases, manipulation's okay. The real question is, what's the intent behind it? If the intent behind it is malevolent, or I'm not interested in you all I want is your money very quickly, then it really does come across as, am I working to your best intent, or am I working for? And I think most retailers now step over that line. I think you become aware of it, just become aware of the fact that you're being manipulated, where you're sitting, where you're walking, who you're with has been engineered and designed specifically. It's not to necessarily be in your best interest. It's to be in the best financial interest of the person who's selling. Whether that's
Go ahead.
And whether that's the person on the in the market, the vegetable market, or whether or not it's one of the big retailers, they want your money. And there's nothing wrong with that exchange, money for goods, but just be aware that are you doing what's in your best interest or their best interest?
And I think a couple of other things, and they may not be foolproof methods, but things that have worked in my experience that I think will help, especially if you are trying to find ways to help yourself not fall prey to some of these things that are happening, especially in store, is make a list, because a list will help steer your direction. It won't entirely help, but if you go in without a list, then everything now becomes a part of what you need, whether you actually needed it or not. Certainly, when you're at the grocery store, don't go in hungry, because if you're hungry, then there's more of an inclination to buy something that you may not need at that time. Set a budget, I think, is also good, because if you have a budget and you create some parameters, and maybe it's even, if you do the budget, then it allows you to gauge where you are in terms of what you're purchasing against how much you wanted to spend. And maybe even, Phil, allow yourself and say, okay, I'm going to allow myself 2 items that weren't on my list, or 3 items. And now you're creating some constraints and restraints for yourself as you're going into this experience versus kind of an overall free-for-all. Or maybe shop online and have it delivered, or do the pickup, the order online, pickup curbside, because then there's less inclination to do some of that kind of impulse purchase, because there still is available, but it's not as readily available, especially if you don't scroll all the way down on the items that you're trying to purchase. So I think those are some additional ways in the in-person experience, Phil, that we can use to help us at least avoid some of the pitfalls. And even your algorithms on social media, you can reset them. One, take a break from social media overall, right? So take a break and let yourself step away from it. But then you can also reset it. You can start searching other stuff. Start searching different types of dogs, or start searching, I don't know, comedy or humor, whatever it is, as you're trying to reset. You can reset your social media algorithms anyways. If you're finding that you've got a lot of influencers that are showing you things to purchase, search other stuff and it'll reset your algorithm. Now, it'll only stay reset for the period of time in which you engage with the content that you're searching. If you fall back into searching with the other content, then obviously that's where the algorithm is going to follow you to.
Yeah, the other thing is, when you go and you're looking for, certainly for bigger purchases, what in advance, right? Excuse me. In advance, write down the attributes that you actually want.
Right.
It needs to be not top quality, but it needs to be 2/3 up the quality line. It needs to be got a warranty of at least 2 years, whatever it might be. Do those things in advance. Helps you be able to go, oh yeah, these are the ones, these are the things that were important to me.
Right.
Writing a list, and just one of the things the brain loves is completion. It's got Gestalt theory, the whole of things. So when you actually go in and you shop and you've got everything on your list, out of there.
Out the door. Amen. Amen. That's why we do use the device, because then the list is digital and I can have it and both of us can add to it. And then I can check it off as I go and I'm done. So I really do enjoy having the shopping list. And because there's specific things that we all want to purchase. And we've all have gone into a store at some point without a list and then left without the item that we initially went into the store for.
Absolutely happened. And there's another way I've found as I've got older, is a guaranteed way of not spending too much. Whenever I leave my credit cards at home, it never fails that I don't spend as much.
Cash only. Exactly. Cash only. When I go to Vegas and I want to, because I'm not a big gambler, but when I do go, I don't take my credit cards. I don't take my debit cards. There's just a certain amount of money, which is like $100. And that's it. Once it's gone, you can follow a very similar principle in the retail stores. At least in the retail stores, you're getting something for your money. Whereas I'm just throwing it away. But anyways, I think these are some good tips for people. If you think about from the perspective of, we're all obviously having to purchase and go into retail stores and ultimately encounter salespeople and encounter these overall engineered experiences. What are the things that we can do to help ourselves not be prone to purchasing as much? Now, maybe there's some people who really do enjoy that and that's a part of your love and it's not as big of a deal. No big deal. Continue doing what you're doing. Being aware of what's happening, I think, is still really positive. But I think for a lot of us, especially during times where things are costing a bit more and we need to be a bit more economical, understanding some of these things and practicing some of these tips certainly can help us to save a little bit more money in our pocket.
And just recognize, I mean, we said in summary is number one, but also awareness of what's going on. And if you can catch it and go, oh, I see why they're doing this, you can actually get a reward out of that little discovery. It is just as good as actually spending the money.
Very good. Excellent. I think this has been a great conversation, Phil. And of course, for our BrainWise friends, if you enjoyed our podcast episode today, comment, share, subscribe, rate and review us wherever it is you're getting your podcast so others can continue to join our BrainWise community. Reach out to us at questions@mybrainwisecoach.com if you have any questions or thoughts or things you want to share, or if any of the tips that we've shared with you are having success in your own life. We would love to hear if they're having success. You can also leave those in the comments section if you so choose. But until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and always stay brainwise.
Stay brainwise.